Alright, so here's the next chapter. We're going to continue a little bit of what we did last chapter for the first part, but then we're going to jump back into some new stuff. It's actually going to be a little bit of cleanup from the last part. I mentioned before that the preserve UVs can sometimes mess up your UVs. I'm going to show you what happened in one of those places. I also want to show you the polyboost UV tweak. So you can kind of move, you click on verts and faces, and you can kind of start moving how these work. How these UVs are actually being laid on your model. It's pretty helpful, really, especially for fixing up just those couple areas where things get a little stretchy. And here's some areas I want to fix up on the actual model. You can see right there I have the material on, so you can actually see what the preserve UV does. Kind of slides around. And this is something I like to do a lot, is once I've textured in an area, I sometimes like to go over and to reinforce that detail, add a little bit more modeling detail to that. Even if it's just a little thing, it can really help, especially when the light hits it. Since we're not using displacements, it kind of sells the effect a little bit better than just a texture with a normal map. There's an area where the preserve UVs did anything but preserve them, so we need to push a few of these things around. So we're going to toss it into body paint, and then we're going to do some ZBrush stuff pretty soon, and having these overlapped areas is not going to be good. So we collapse that. I just want to fix up a few last things before. So say for this, I want to move just this mouth. Well, I can do that using this and turning some of this stuff down a little bit. And painting in these details a little bit. And you can also use the lock soft selection to lock those areas, so you can move it from any point, but you still have the same soft selection. A couple nice little features in Max. I don't use them all that much, but every now and again I'm really happy they're there. Because you have it on edge slide there, so it kind of moves everything around. I want to break up his chin a little too, because he's got that messed up face, so got to imagine the bone and the skin is healed up a little strange in that area. Alright, we're going to save this map out, just like we've done before. It's a UVW map that we can put onto channel 1. Usually you can just copy and paste, but for some reason I was having trouble with his head. Usually when you have that, you can just do a snapshot, and that'll usually fix it. So I'm loading that on. Or it definitely will take a moment. But some stuff to keep in mind with body paint is just your usual interface here. It'll import all of your lights, which you don't want. So even though you delete them in body paint, it's not deleting them in the max file, which a lot of people seem to be afraid to do. So I want to reinforce some of this detail that I've done. What I did there is I just went to the tools for Cinema 4D tools and reassigned the pivot point. Now he has some cool scarring that we added, but it's not quite there. You can see we added this like kind of a concrete on top of there. I didn't show too much of that yet. We'll do some more of that later on. But the effect is there. Now some great tools in body paint are the clone tool, which has a scale and rotation options. So you can actually scale an area during your cloning, and also have it fade and everything. So that's kind of nice. You can also just copy and paste it, which I do a lot when I'm in projection mode. Just going to race around that a little bit. Something to keep in mind is that you're in projection mode, so you want to make sure that what you're painting on isn't at all skewed from the camera, or else you get some crazy stretching. You can see that didn't really come out as good as I wanted, so I'm going to do some cloning here. And I've got the scaling up a little bit now. I like the way this detail looked here, but it didn't show up on the mesh like I'd hoped when I painted it. What's nice is that in here I can just copy, paste it, scale it, fade around the area that didn't show up so well. Now I've got a nice little sharp detail there. Maybe get some of this gooey brown in there, which with the specular map should look pretty nice. We'll follow down where the scar goes too. And I like this cracky texture all over the place. Might not be the most realistic thing, but like I said, we're doing kind of a stylized, kind of comic bookish character here, so I'm just going to use a brush tool and go over some of this texture detail that I used from photos, because some of this stuff gets a little bit blurry. And using the burn midtone is kind of like using a multiply brush in Photoshop. And all these little dots that are right next to the every option in body paint, when you turn those on, when you toggle those on, you're actually turning on sensitivity control for your Wacom or whatever tablet. So you can turn those on and off at random and at will, and you have a lot of options in there of what is actually being controlled. But really, for the most part, for this kind of stuff, all I need is just the size. I'm just going to enhance some of these areas that I've done some detailing to. Maybe add a few little bits of stubble here and there where it got a little bit lost. What's nice is all this stuff, when we actually convert this to a normal map, is going to push in a little bit too. So it's going to be kind of a double whammy, even though it's a little bit dark and unrealistic right now. It should look pretty cool later on. And I want to add a little bit of wrinkle here too. Fade that, give it a little bit of a fall off. Turn this on too. You can see the pressure just kind of goes out of will otherwise, but now that we have this on, it might be a little intense. Here we go. So we're just adding, basically all I'm doing is finding these areas of detail and just kind of going over them once with the brush. We're going to do it again to break up some of this edge on this thing. And then some of these little lines that go into his eye where it's gotten really fused and nasty. That skin should look pretty gross. And some of the nose wrinkles and stuff. It's all pretty subtle, really. Just want to add more of these little cracks and stretches to the skin where it looks dead. And then just sample some colors too. Paint in some stuff. Since it's dead skin too, it should get a little bit whiter and less saturated on that stretched area. What's cool with I like to have work in the UV edit. This is the default UV edit layout, but you can totally customize this interface to however you see fit. You have different camera options as well. I think I mentioned before where it'll default to a parallel camera that'll kind of clip a lot. And I always just like to keep it in perspective. And then you just click that little toggle button up there, and it'll jump right back and update all your maps and everything. We're going to turn off that unwrap UVW so we have our XYZ to UVW again. And we're just going to open up, we don't need that. Just going to open up that map to see what we've done. You can see this is the old map before we did all these changes. And we've done quite a few changes. This is another way to do it. If you just want to do it in This has some kind of interesting texture to it that I think can work pretty well for this wound. At least for a starting point for the wound. I wanted to show body paint a little bit before I showed all this. We're kind of going to backtrack a little bit. This is the Z-App link. This is a nice tool. Want to get this over to ZBrush by putting this on to channel 1. Instead of ZBrush will actually default and start to try and force whatever mesh you're bringing in to be like your old mesh. And we don't want that, so I just basically cleared it by drawing a Z-sphere on the screen and then clearing that and then remerging that new OBJ. I'm going to bring on the face dirt and I'm going to save this out as a BMP. Because we're going to use a ZBrush feature to actually bring out a lot of this detail in the texture without having to paint it ourselves. It's a great feature which I recently just kind of started doing, and I find it really helpful. So first, just kind of let things wake up a little bit. My graphic card has a problem displaying edges when I'm actually painting in things, so I'm going to have to turn that off for a moment. Bring this back on. I'm going to enhance these wrinkles that I've already painted. This is one way you could do it. You could use your texture map as a guideline, and you could just go over these areas. You can see I've already painted the whites and darks areas, so now I can go in ZBrush and actually just start actually saying, okay, well, this is where I want. I'm going to make this scar look a little grosser. What I did there was we made a mask based on the intensity of the map that we have merged in. Now, because the color isn't exactly a 50% gray, it's becoming a bit of an inflate problem. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to, since we stored the morph target earlier, we're going to go back to a little bit earlier thing here. Hang on one sec. We might even just start over. Can't quite get it back. Here we go. Go back to base. Yeah, I'm just going to start over here. That kind of showed you how you could do it by just using that as a template to draw them. This is going to show you how you could use this as using your texture map that you just spent all this time on as a base for your actual textures. So you can see I click that, and it makes a mask. I turn off the color because it darkened everything. It's hard to see. Use that kind of dark gray. I like to work in kind of gray colors. Then just using the inflate and the smooth tools, it'll start pushing and pulling in these areas where we have things masked off. You can see what it does if I undo and pull it out a little bit, smooth it. Just going to invert that mask. And that mask wasn't working too well. Like I said, these colors are not really too good for what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to just kind of darken them a little bit. It's just inflating a little too much right now. And there's a few areas that I want to pop out more than they are in this mask. This is kind of like a blend of the old school and the new school, where you actually would paint your displacement map. But now you can actually see it in real time and then edit it on your 3D model. And since we've all started over, bring this in. We're going to take the intensity from the mask, from the texture intensity, I should say. And there we go. You can already see it on there, even though we haven't done anything. You can see what it's going to do a little bit. And by using the smooth and inflate, you can see we're getting this texture detail out. Now he's getting a little inflated more than we want, but we're not. That's going to be okay. We're going to use the old morph trick that we have stored and kind of paint some stuff back, but the high frequency detail should remain. I want to enhance some of this stuff. Even though that's a great tool, it only can go, to a certain point. So it's not going to give us that 3D effect. It's going to give us kind of a texture effect, and we don't want that. So go down to a lower res so that when I'm smoothing these areas, I'm not ruining my my high frequency detail that I just added by all this. Kind of a backwards way to work, really. When I should be painting in more of the face main structures, but since we have most of that already built in the model, I think it's okay to just jump to here. A little specular is nice. And I like to work with a darker color. You can see the detail a little bit easier. Split up this lip a little bit more. Now things start getting slow because we've got a lot of geometry going right now. We're just going to mask off that selection. And now I want to break him up a little. I want to make him, his skin's a little blotchy. He's had a rough life. Enhance some of these scars. Going to use some textures later on, like some concrete textures and stuff, to actually make kind of a weird crackly effect on here, which should look pretty cool. I just want to work on this side of the face. And I'll look at my character from a lot of different angles sometimes when I'll work, and just to make sure it's all working together. We've got that side piece. We haven't really done anything to that yet. Maybe a little bit more tension on the eyes. And then to do these crow's feet, I like to use the deco brush. It's quick. Great tool for doing wrinkles, though. It's nice you can paint in these details, and then we will soften them because obviously some of them are getting a little sharp and not very organic looking. You can see I need to fix this up a little bit. Okay. Computer freezes up a little bit. Sometimes it's saving the file over in Max, autosave. And it tends to make things go a little chuggy, so I usually just wait until it comes back. Now here I'm going to load in a little texture I made. I'm going to use this to bring out a little detail in the scar area. Some of that skin could be pulled a little bit better. Now it'd be really fun to go in and just do an insane amount of detail in here, but I just want to get the impression across of what I'm trying to do. Using inflate, you can kind of get some cool effects after those crow's feet we just made. Smooth them out, inflate. Want to enhance some of these wrinkles on his forehead. Up, take a look at what we've done. Let's work a little bit more on these eyes. Some of these wrinkles look a little strange, but I think once they're really just going to be on a normal map, so hopefully they'll be all right. If they're not, we can always paint it out in Photoshop or come back to ZBrush and fix some of this stuff. Okay, it's getting pretty much where I want it to be. I want to enhance a few more details in here. Some more pores on the nose. Bring some of these things down. They're a little uniform right now. I'm using the morph brush now to fix the ear. It got really inflated. I think for the rest it's going to be okay, but these ears, we don't want them to... They kind of inflate on top of themselves, and that's not right. So now we're up on the level 4. We can... Level 5, that's how far we went. Want to do some I'm even doing some proportional adjustments now too. So when I'm done, I'm going to go back to Cage and export this as a separate mesh that I use. I'm going to add some more cracks and wrinkles to this guy's face. And this is just using the normal brushes in ZBrush. The skin should have healed kind of strange in this area. Got a couple little scars, even though it's not that area. A couple of scars would be cool. Enhance some of those neck wrinkles. Bring that out a little bit more. The chin got a little strange here, so I'm going to adjust this a little bit. Some of these edits are so subtle you can barely see them, but they do help. You can also right-click to go to your draw size menu. I tried to go to the menus as much as possible so you wouldn't get confused about what's going on, but I think most people have a solid understanding of ZBrush at this point. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about what every little thing is. There's plenty of DVDs out there that are just on those topics. And we still have quite a bit of stuff to go over. Okay. Fix his neck up a little bit. Make that jaw a little better. Ears. Now, the back of the ear area of the head isn't exactly perfect right now because he's going to have hair, so I'm going to just kind of let it slide as it is. But now, saving your Z-tool is always a good idea, just in case things crash. And I'll save this file in there so you guys can take a look at the different levels. Alright, well we generated the map. We're going to come back in here. Undo a few levels here. I just merged all the layers onto a flat layer here. I'm going to show you the NVIDIA Normal Map plugin. This should be a free plugin, I believe. Something we use at Blur a lot for doing simple normal maps. And also, if you don't have body paint, you do have ZBrush. This is a great way to do some projection map stuff. You can see I just went into projection master mode, and I clicked on the Z app link and brought it over here with just the shaded. And now I'm just using my texture map and projecting, just like we did in body paint earlier, projecting these little chunks of texture onto the mesh. And what's cool is you now have this layer above, the Z shader, the G shading, that you don't do anything with. But you can turn it on and off and actually see some of the depth of your model. His nose is a little, needs a little bit more detail to it. Gonna use Sean. Sean's got a nice bit of detail on his nose there. Thanks, Sean. Now let's flip this, get it in place. And let's see what else. You get some of these stuff, yeah. Since I don't have a good shot of the front of the nose, I'm gonna fake it. You can do that a lot. You can use parts of skin in a lot of places that aren't exactly the right part. And then I'm just gonna enhance some of these edges. You can bring out some of the detail that you did in the model with the texture now. And make sure it lines up just perfect. I'm just sampling little colors that are already on the mesh and using them to bring out more of these details. And what's cool is I know a lot of these areas are going to be caved in, so I'm not worrying too much about how much texture I have, but what I'll do is I'll make kind of a guide just by painting them, and then use that as a selection set or a selection and copy the actual mesh below, and then just change the color of that, and it's going to have all the detail of the texture that we added, but it's going to look better. Alright. So I just did another little projection here and just enhancing some of this detail. The closer you get, the more detail you're going to project, but it really still depends on how big your map is. Our map is pretty big. I believe it's 3096 by 2048, which and once we have a specular map in there too, we can make that a little wet. And fade it back a little bit, make it more real. There we go, that's looking pretty cool. And then you just, basically all you have to do when you're using the Z app link is you save Make sure you collapse everything except for that top layer that says do not touch. And save it, bring it back to ZBrush, and it should update everything. If it doesn't, just Alt-Tab and go back to Photoshop, and then Alt-Tab back to ZBrush, and it should update it. So I copied that piece of scar that we made earlier, and now I'm using it on these parts. Just going to project it right on. Painting in some more detail, some of these cracks, and a couple highlights. Then bringing that scar out a little bit more too. Not quite sure what part I need to work on. There we go. Let me bring this out. Since I painted in these little crow's feet, there's nothing in the texture there to really enhance that. So I'm gonna kind of bring it out in the texture as well. The normal map won't be quite as harsh as all this because we're going to have a subsurface scatter shader which really kind of softens everything. Now after I do all this, I just save out the PSD. Let me go to the Z mapper to make my my normal map and my cavity map again. Here we go, making the cavity map first. It's pretty fast too. Let's export it and let's call it cavity. As you can see, the texture map flipped. I flipped it on V, but the cavity map didn't flip. So you just put it on top, and then put it onto a multiply. Turn the color to something a little bit more red. And set it down quite a bit. We don't need it to be quite so intense. For now it's okay, but I don't want to fade that off so we don't have a harsh edge there. And then we'll just save this over to take a look at what we've done. Usually a JPEG option of 10. You don't need to go to 12. It's pretty much not going to corrupt your textures. So long as you're working in your Photoshop file. If you kept opening that JPEG and working on it, I think you're going to have some problems. But since we're working from Photoshop files, 10 is usually a good number to go with. I'm going to use this piece of concrete here to make his skin blotchier. And also a little bit more illustrated looking. Because I don't want to quite make a completely photoreal type guy, so this kind of, you know, it's not exactly realistic, but it can look kind of neat. And then I want to bring out his 5 o'clock shadow a little bit more too. Alright. Erase some chunks there. Enhance some of these edges. We're going to make a little bit of a custom brush here just to do a little bit of stubble. So let's turn the scattering on quite a bit and do a couple of tests just to see what it's going to do. Some of them are a little too dense, so we just turn it down and there we go, that's pretty good. What's nice about this is now we're going to have it on a separate layer, so we can bring it out in the specular and the bump, and it's not just baked into the texture. That's where we're at now. Or actually before the render. Let's see, I want to enhance these scars a little bit more too. Actually, I kind of want to make the neck look a little bit dirty. That look where looks kind of like he's been blasted by dirt and he's moved his head, and then the wrinkles in his neck kind of kept clean, so he's got these little kind of white lines kind of running across. I'm just cloning this area a couple times, and then I'm erasing little lines across. Whoops, that's a little weird. Let's try this. Turn on that. Maybe a little texture and dual brush. Make it soft. Turn that opacity down. My Wacom seems to not be working quite right, so I should sell the effect. I'm gonna flip it over. There we go. We're going to use this to I want to bring out these scars a little bit. Hong's design has them pretty dark. Find a color we like. And we'll save this out. Now we're going to make we'll feather the selection a little bit because it's a little too harsh. And then bring these two down to kind of try and blend it in a little bit better. Might be kind of neat. Then his lips should be wet, especially with that jaw being hung open. Probably drools out of it all the time. And then bring out a little bit of the sweat. It's really pretty dark in some of these areas, so we'll probably be redoing this specular map pretty soon. And just like on the other scar, we're going to bring this out, bring that down, bring that up. Important thing here is that we don't have any like just standard white washes over the whole thing. It's kind of broken up, so when the light hits it, it should have some pretty interesting results. Re-adding some of these maps. You can see what it's doing up in the little shader ball. It's pretty helpful to, before you spend the time rendering it, take a look at what the two things do. You can see it's quite drastic that we've added quite a bit of the wetness away from his face. So I'm going to bring it up a bit because I do want him to look kind of damp, sweaty. And that bump should be quite a bit higher. Trying some weird colors on the highlight stuff, but I'm just experimenting at this point. Every character is going to have a little different settings here and there. So there's what he's looking like there. Now I've been jumping around a little bit. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I kind of want to show stuff in order. So if this isn't exactly how we did everything. You notice that the body paint part had some scars and stuff, which we're actually going to be adding right now. So we got a little bit backwards there, but I think it was better to show the body paint stuff first, since pretty much everyone knows a good deal about Photoshop. And then the Z-App link is something new that they've just added, and then this is something pretty standard. So a little easier to comprehend. So hopefully that doesn't throw anyone too far off. Seemed like a good idea at the time. So you can see what I'm doing there is I'm just kind of adding these little cracky areas around, and as you've seen later on, we're going to in body paint fix this up. I'm trying a different color on here. I don't know that that's the color to go for, but now that I've added it, I can fade stuff around, and I think, yeah, I like that kind of a little bit blotchier and gray kind of color. We'll bring out these specular a bit too, especially on the lips and the nose. Any area I think should be wet, which is what the map does. Thinking maybe a vein in the forehead. This is kind of a template, but I'm going to fade it back and not really do too much else with it. Doing stuff like this with a little blur and everything, you can kind of add a lot of cool effects. And then these, just like we did before, using the outer glow as a multiply. And if you're wondering why we do that instead of using the drop shadow, it's because it gives it an overall kind of glow around the shape instead of just one direction. And we don't want to bake in lighting too much because, you know, that's a problem, but sometimes a little enhancement here and there isn't bad. Later on, when it gets to scene assembly, we may need to fix a few things here and there, but at this point, it can help sell the character pretty quick. So we're going to add a couple more cracks here and there, and just keep saving and rendering and looking at them and seeing when we're happy. Keep that diffusion down because otherwise it'll really affect your your kind of wetness sheen, the oiliness they call it. If it's up too much, it'll mess things up. And I want to, once again, I mentioned earlier when we kind of add this saturation, I did it before just in the output channel, but now I'm actually adding a color correct to that map. And then by flipping back and forth, you can actually see what it does. And here, we can watch in the render. It's pretty subtle, really. But you should see here, this looks a lot nicer. This looks really gross now. This is just what I wanted. And since I'm using that also as a bump, it brings it out a little bit. The whole scar area is looking about how I wanted it to look at this point. I'll keep adding more detail as we go, but for the most part, I've got a pretty good look compared to what I wanted. I want to hide everything. Now he's got this messed up eye too. This is the last thing I really want to do on the head. I could just simply put the same eye on the other side, but it might be neat to have this kind of dead floating eye in there. I'm just going to plop a symmetry on there and collapse it. Strip that eye off onto its own. These eyes aren't lined up correctly right now either for rigging, so we'll have to fix that up later. Making them point straight ahead. Sometimes you get a little bit of kind of cheesy too. Kind of thinking of making it a little bit more albino, or maybe only half filled with blood, or something different. Like he burst something in there. Yeah, okay, let's try something different here. Almost graying all these colors out a little bit. I'm just kind of experimenting with some different looks that I think might look interesting. I want to bring it out a little bit more, and then I kind of want to get rid of that pupil too to make it a little bit more, so it looks like it doesn't work. The eye, no, maybe a cataract kind of look. If you ever look those up on the internet, they're pretty interesting, pretty scary looking. I don't know if I want to go quite that far with it, but it's a thought. So what I'll do here is just kind of give it that. The eye's kind of dead there. I'm just going to add a little border around that too. I'm not really using that shape I just drew. I'm going to all this area is that's overlapped. Yeah, that's something we should fix up. But yeah, let's see, a couple more settings changed here and there. Maybe gray it out a little bit more. Yeah, this might be a little gross, but let's just try it. And then we add a gradient just to kind of give it a more realistic look. And a blur.